In today's episode of Dear Parents, we have three different kind of areas, and I would love for your feedback and comments on these different areas because I'm trying to get into a more regular rhythm and format, and I really like this format, but I would love for it to be meaningful to you, the listeners. So please comment and share on this post on Substack if this is meaningful for you. The three areas, the first thing we're going to do is talk through an article. So the article is one that I saw recently about the association between antibiotics and acid suppressive medicines with food allergies and anaphylaxis, and getting into the weeds of that and what we as parents and pediatricians should be doing to avoid exposure to things that can have some downstream harms. The second, I get to have a conversation with a therapist friend of mine. She runs at Parenting the Anxious Child on Instagram, and I love her content because it's a very fresh, nuanced approach to anxiety that really focuses on the parent adjusting what they're doing rather than trying to get their child over their anxiety. And then in the third section, I have a question and answer. And this is from a mom of a 3-year-old who's very impulsive. Hopefully this new format resonates with you and you like it. Today's episode is brought to you by Nova Ferrum. I'm going to talk more about them in a little bit, but they make iron supplements that infants, toddlers, big kids, and even adults will take and taste great so that you actually keep taking the supplements. More on them later. We will get started with that article right after this music. Okay, so the article that I came across that really struck my interest and got a lot of discussion on my Instagram was about acid suppressive medicines, antibiotics, and the risk of food allergy and anaphylaxis. So this is a study, and I'll link to it, of course, in the show notes so you can actually go read it for yourself, which is always worthwhile. This study was called the Association of Acid Suppressive Medication and Antimicrobial Use in Infancy with Food Allergy and Anaphylaxis. And so here's one of the theories that we've always thought about and wondered about. And I actually talked about this on one of my very first posts, like in 2018, about acid suppression and subsequent food allergies. The thought is, the gut is the area in our body that has the most immune cells outside of our skin. And so if we're changing the gut, we can expect that there could be down the line immune system changes because of that. Acid suppressive medicines are often given to fussy infants or infants with reflux, and that helps to suppress the acid production, but it changes a lot of different things in the gut, especially which bacteria can then thrive in a different environment when it comes to the pH and the acid levels and all those sorts of things. And so that's been something that for at least the last decade we've been talking about, is avoiding acid suppressive medicines. And then on the flip side, avoiding antibiotics too, because we obviously know antibiotics affect the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome plays a huge role in our whole lives when it comes to our immune system, infection susceptibility. It plays a role in inflammation. It plays a role in mental health. We just know and keep learning all the different ways that the gut microbiome influences our health. And we know that early exposure to different antibiotics, to big changes in the gut microbiome, can have an impact. So this study actually looked at a couple of different things when it came to either acid suppressive medicines or antibiotics, and then subsequent risk in children of developing food allergies and anaphylaxis from foods. What they found, and it was interesting, and it's something that I'll share my perspective on it. They found that in children where there was acid suppression, what this study found was that the food allergy risk is much higher in children that receive acid suppression in the first year of life. So when they looked at this study, they found that the food allergy risk was 5 times higher if an infant was prescribed a proton pump inhibitor in the first year of life. Proton pump inhibitors are things like omeprazole, lansoprazole. Most of them end in a little azole there. And what they also found was that in other acid suppressing medicines like histamine blockers, that was also associated with a 3 to 4 times increase in the risk of food allergies. And then if we flip to the other side and think about antibiotics, the more times that your child gets an antibiotic in the first year of life, the higher the likelihood that they could go on to develop a food allergy. So this was a dose-dependent sort of thing where one exposure increased their likelihood of food allergies to about 2 times the likelihood of developing food allergies. A second exposure, even more so, more than 3 exposure days. More than 3 exposures to antibiotics was associated with an even higher risk, almost 4 times the likelihood of going on to develop food allergies. And so it's like, well, why would we ever use these? Well, there's lots of good reasons that we would consider using these for children in the first year of life. Sometimes we have a baby that's born prematurely and they need antibiotics because they're at risk for serious bacterial infection. What are we going to do? We're not going to say, well, there's a risk that they get a food allergy, but they're at risk right now for a serious bacterial infection, so we're going to give them the antibiotics. And there's lots of studies in the NICU when it comes to using the least antibiotics possible. And so I feel like that's wrapped up in just something that is part of life. We have a newborn baby that was born prematurely that had an infection or a risk of infection. We're going to have to use antibiotics in those cases. And so we can't avoid those. On the flip side of that, some babies have severe acid reflux. They can't tolerate breast milk. They can't tolerate a lot of formulas. They have a lot of difficulty gaining weight. They're having bloody poop. There's all sorts of good reasons that you may say we need to suppress this baby's acid production because it's causing serious harm to the child and to their development and growth and all of those sorts of things, that we say we have to do this despite the fact that it might put them at risk for something down the road. But, and this is a big but, there's a lot of children out there that are given antibiotics when it's not necessary. There's a lot of children out there that are started on acid suppressing medicines because they're a little bit fussy or they're a little bit spitty or the parents can't get them to settle easily. And so this study to me says we should be really intentional. We can't completely eliminate it because these can be very important medicines for our child, but what we should do is be very choosy and slow to react when we can. We could say, well, before we start on an acid suppressant medicine, let's adjust the diet. Let's make sure that we're doing all of the different things to set them up for success when it comes to feeding positions, making sure that our milk supply is in line and we're not having an issue with oversupply. Maybe it's taking dairy out of the mother's diet if they're breastfeeding, or soy, something along those lines. We always do very much a stepwise approach of let's try this for 2 weeks, and then let's try this for 2 weeks, and let's try this for 2 weeks. And oftentimes by the time we've made it through some of those 2-week increments, things have gotten better. We don't always know why, but it puts a lot of space between fussy baby, spitty baby, and let's get them on an acid suppressing medicine because there are good reasons to avoid acid suppressing medicines. Same with antibiotics. If your child has a urinary tract infection, they need an antibiotic. That can be serious. It can lead to sepsis and all those sorts of things. If your 6-month-old, 8-month-old has a one-sided ear infection that's not severe, that's a conversation of, do we really need to do an antibiotic, or can we give this a day? Give this 2 days, check back again, either have them come into the office. We just check in over text message. How are they doing? Is it getting worse? Is their fever getting worse? Are they having trouble feeding? Okay, we need to move on with an antibiotic versus, oh, okay, it sounds like they're, trucking along. Most ear infections will clear on their own with time, which is a American Academy of Pediatrics, like otitis media ear infection guidelines, is most will clear on their own. We can safely watch this without the antibiotic exposure. And so I think most parents are actually now quite hip to this and want to avoid antibiotics whenever possible. And I think it's important for parents to make that known to their pediatrician of, hey, we know that there are certain times when we really need an antibiotic. We would rather avoid them if and when possible. And we want to partner with you because we don't want you to feel like there's this perception that parents come into the office and they want an antibiotic. That has never been my experience. Parents don't want an antibiotic. They want to feel heard and understood. And so this study helps me to say, okay, this is something that makes sense from a biological mechanism sort of standpoint. You change the pH in the gut, and different bacteria that affect the immune system now and in the future can thrive and affect those immune systems and lead to food allergy, lead to anaphylaxis, lead to eczema and things along those lines. And so we want to avoid that. We want to avoid antibiotics when at all possible. But in some cases that we just have to do the math and say, well, there's risks on both sides of the equation. And in this case, the risks are outweighed by the benefits to doing an antibiotic now, to doing an acid suppression medicine now. But just know that this is something that is out there, and that if you're having questions, having concerns, definitely bring it up with your pediatrician. Now, after the little musical interlude here, we're going to talk about anxiety. If you ever come across an article, though, that really strikes your fancy or makes you think, or gets you curious about what's the scoop on this, please send it to me. The link to the show notes, in the show notes, there's a link that will give you access to the comment section for this specific podcast over on my Substack. You can go there. You can say, hey, check out this article. What do you think? I would love to talk through the articles that are on your radar and the things that you're seeing to help to shine some light from the pediatrics, from the parenting side of things. Today, I'm excited because I get to talk about anxiety. This is something that we see all the time. You, as a parent, probably experience anxiety yourself, but then also your children experience anxiety as well. And I wanted to talk with a therapist that I will tell you, and you probably all know from following me or listening to my stuff, I don't spend a lot of time on social media myself because I don't find that it makes me a better person when I am online or reading comments or things along those lines. But I am on there occasionally. And one of my favorite people to follow and absorb from is Robyn Isman. What I really like about her content is that she is just very real about it. It is not over dressed up, it is not too permissive. It feels just right for what parents need to hear and actually incorporate. And sometimes what she says doesn't always just make you feel like you got everything figured out and you're doing everything right. It makes you feel like, okay, I could change this approach. And so I warned her that I would give a really long-winded, rambly introduction, and there it is. So thank you for being here today, Robyn. I'm excited to get to chat and talk about anxious kids and how to help them. What made you choose, of all the different things that you could do when it comes to being a therapist and helping patients, what drew you to anxious kids?
Honestly, I think I started my work as an in-home family therapist in Massachusetts. It's a state-funded program called Children's Behavioral Health Initiative, and we do wraparound care, and one of the roles is in-home family therapy. So I immediately
Cool.
was like seeing the entire family. So that was kind of like out of the gate what I did. And but what the reason after I did that and I decided I was going to start a private practice, I kind of did the thing that a lot of people do, which is while you're working full time, you start a private practice and all that. And I started to see anxious kids. And honestly, the reason I did that was because I think of anxiety as the gateway diagnosis. I
Mm,
think of anxiety symptoms are the symptoms you can see. And it is usually the reason someone calls is my kid is anxious. They are either avoiding something, their behavior is acting out. Parents might not use the word anxiety always, but there's something happening that is disrupting the patterns of their day. And anxiety was often just like catch-all. And honestly, I'm curious. I mean, I'm always curious about the future of mental health and all of that, but I think anxiety, people are always like, what's the root? What's the root? What's the root? And I think the thing with anxiety is that it's actually not, oh, it's not really a root situation. It's really like that's how anxiety is how we protect ourselves from whatever it is that's going on that feels
right.
like unbearable in that moment. So if your diagnosis is ADHD or if you have executive functioning challenges, it often shows up as anxiety because when you
Mm,
enter a social situation or you enter a more unstructured situation, anxiety is what we see. We don't always see the
right.
ADHD, we see the anxiety. So it started out with, oh, it was just who was coming. It was like, also, if I'm going to be really real, on Psychology Today, the biggest whatever, which I'm not even on
Right.
anymore, the biggest marketing website for therapists, everyone writes, I treat anxiety because it's just the most kind of basic standard thing that
Sure.
shows up.
Right.
But what happened was I started seeing kids with anxiety and then was like, oh, I need to really deeply understand this. This is not a small thing. And you can really, for lack of a better, are we allowed to swear on this podcast? I don't
Sure.
know.
Go for it.
Okay. I was going to say F it up. You can really F it up because on Psychology Today, you'll see all these people will be like, I treat anxiety. But treating anxiety is not talking to you about what you are anxious about. And in fact, it's the opposite of that. And so when you start to see what's going on and people are doing that in their therapy, I started being like, oh my God, this isn't working and this isn't right. And so I started really leaning into getting like all my continuing ed was with anxiety work. My OG guru is Lynn Lyons, who, if you're local to the Northeast, she's out of New Hampshire. And she really taught me how to explain anxiety in terms of the parental role of anxiety. But it was
Mm,
more like understanding anxiety as being like an entity that the child experienced and then the parents role in it. So I did that for a while and I understood it that way. And while you're working with anxious kids, you very quickly learn and honestly, while you're working with kids at all, you very quickly learn you have to reach the parents. So what I would
Sure.
do is anecdotally, I would bring parents in and I would explain, okay, this is a way that we might need to help them, or this is how you want to talk to your kids about anxiety. And I would use Lynn Lyons' language and all of that. And then I don't know what time is time. What is time anymore? So I don't know what year it was.
Sure.
But at some point a few years ago, I came across SPACE, which is supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotion. And it is the only evidence-based program proven to decrease anxiety in a child by only working with the parents. And I
Got
stumbled
it.
upon this. It came across my listserv, blah, blah, blah,
Uh-huh.
SPACE. And I was like, what's SPACE? And I Googled it and I was like, oh my God, like I need this in my toolkit. And I went all in. I immediately signed up for the training. I hounded the supervisors that I
Mm,
get fully certified, because you can be trained in it in a couple days, but to get certified, you have to do a whole year certification where you do like group
got it.
supervision and you do case studies and all that. And so I was like, this is what I've been trying to do, but without a package, without a protocol, without the evidence-based stuff. I was just bringing parents in and being like, hey, if you do this, then if you avoid things, your kid's going to be more anxious. I would just start,
Got it.
and I knew exposure was the gold standard of anxiety work. So I was doing it anecdotally, and then I came across SPACE and I was like, oh my God, this is the jackpot. So I have leaned all the way in, and my Instagram, Parenting the Anxious Child, is all me talking to parents of anxious kids. My practice,
Got it.
I do see individuals also. I don't market on Instagram for the individuals because it's just not what my main niche is. But I specialize in anxiety also with individuals, with adults, all that. And then with the parents, I just was like, I don't want to just be telling parents one-off parenting advice. I want to say this is an evidence-based, backed up protocol that I can teach you in 8 to 12 weeks. I also did something that I've never done in my career until SPACE. I followed a curriculum. Like, I'm a
Mm,
social worker. I am a holistic, like, we we don't social workers are going to get mad at me for saying this, but we are not very academic in the sense of,
mhm.
like, when I meet a psychologist, I expect them, if I meet a psychologist that does CBT, I expect them to do strictly CBT. That's
Got it.
like a stereotype I have.
Got it.
With social work, we're so much more broad. You can lean
Sure.
into whatever you lean into, but if I assume I was trained in CBT, I didn't follow a CBT manual. I would use CBT techniques. With SPACE, I follow the manual.
Got it.
And I love it. Like, this is amazing. And you can really work with people with where they are and all that. So that's how I got into it. I got into it because it's what was showing up at my door. What was showing up at
Yeah.
my door was anxious kids. And then it was parents of anxious kids. And then I was like, oh, I need to help these people, because the kid coming to therapy an hour a week outside of their environment is it's not working. It's not like translating into their home. And so we need to have the parents. And then I need to give parents an actual structure. It's not fair to tell parents, I don't know, talk less or do, it's like these small tips when you
Right.
really need to have the full understanding of what's going on. So now SPACE is I love it. I feel like I dream in it. I think about, like, I love anxiety. I always say anxiety lights me up. Anxiety also lights me up because I think it's the most hopeful diagnosis. There's so many
Mm,
diagnoses that are so hard, and they're so, I want to say the word, ingrained or embedded, or they could be cognitive. There could be stuff where it's really hard to, you don't
right.
know what the improvement can be or what the progress. With anxiety, I 100% can help you.
I wanted to share with you about today's sponsor, Novaferum. I get asked a lot about iron in clinic. I talk a lot about it on my social media because I find that it's something that really resonates with people that are trying to figure out their child's sleep, their child's attention, their child's behaviors, especially things like restless sleep, and especially if the child is on the pickier side when it comes to eating. Honestly, a lot of iron supplements fail simply because kids don't want to take them. Novaferum, on the other hand, has chewables and liquid drops. They are Novoferum's chewable and liquid drops skip the added sugar and the artificial sweeteners, and unlike a lot of what else is prescribed or on the shelf, they've been through published clinical studies showing that kids actually stick with the dose and take the medicine. 94% success rate versus 82% for a typical iron supplement. If your pediatrician has flagged low iron, especially if they've gotten a ferritin that is low or they have iron deficiency anemia, it's worth a look, and you can check the link in the show notes. I will have a code in the show notes that gets you 10% off your order. Let's talk through a little bit in that regard then, because I love that idea of focusing on the parents too. And I think that it's underrated how much of a difference, whether it's anxiety, whether it's ADHD, whether it's asthma or some other thing that they're facing, how much the parent can affect their child's diagnosis, experience, improvement, and those sorts of things. Let's take an example then. Let's say I have a 8-year-old that's anxious about bedtime. How does somebody in using SPACE, I guess maybe define for us what SPACE, I love a good acronym. In medicine, we just have as many acronyms as a dictionary would have full of words because we have an acronym for everything, and there's acronyms that overlap in 7 different ways. But I'm curious what SPACE actually stands for, and then how would SPACE approach the anxious 8-year-old at bedtime?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, SPACE is supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotion. It was created by Dr. Ellie Leibowitz with many other researchers on there too, but he's the main author on the books and the research studies. And it was out of Yale Child Study Center. So I didn't create it, and I try to make that clear with citations and other things. I did not create it. I'm just a fan. And what you do with SPACE is the first part is you really give parents a deep understanding of what anxiety is, and that it's biological, and that it's part of us, and that we are mammals, and anxiety is how mammals stayed alive. That is but the human version of that is anxiety, and is the brain making sense of what is going on, and we've taken it too far a bit. And so we start by really having a deep understanding.
Got it.
Another foundation to it is that we are teaching parents to make unilateral parental decisions, so unilateral parental action, which really highlights a difference between SPACE and other child anxiety protocols that include parents. So it's not like you're teaching the kids something. So with PCIT, with parent-child interaction therapy, you're like teaching the parent how to parent the child. You're like, it's like this kind of, you're doing it to the parent, to the child, that it's like they are working on changing the child. You're also like with CBT for parents, where it's like you teach the parent how to teach the child the CBT. It's like that. But SPACE, it's like I am working with the parent on changing the parent and only trying to control the parent. And the results of being able to do that is that then the child is able to feel whatever feelings they're having, but not have those things perpetuated. And I'll tell you in the example of the bedtime. But I just wanted to highlight the unilateral parental action.
That makes sense. Okay, perfect.
Because the reason I want to highlight the unilateral thing, because it's swinging, the pendulum is swinging again, but we did swing too far into the permissive parenting model. Totally. And so a lot of times when I first meet people and meet parents and I explain this to them, what they will do is I will have to explain to them, you're going to make decisions about what you're going to do, and you're not going to ask your child how they feel about it. You're not going to collaborate with your kid. You're not going to see how they respond. It's like you are deciding what the boundary in the house is, because that boundary, not having it, is actually making their anxiety worse. So an example around bedtime is that parents will say, I want my kid to be able to sleep by themselves, or I want bedtime to not take 2 hours. And my response is, then you have to stop it. You have to break the pattern. But then they're like, but they're going to freak out. I'm like, no, I know. And I know that. But unless you stop the pattern, they're never going to stop it. The anxious brain, the anxious child is never going to come to you and say, you know what I really need is to feel really scared at night by myself for a bunch of nights in a row, so eventually I can heal. That's not going to happen that way. So we need to teach the parent how to express to the child, I am going to change this thing because this is actually better for you. So what we do is we first do the explanation of what is anxiety, what is unilateral parental action, and then we do a deep dive of accommodations that the parents are doing. So it's anything you're
Mm,
doing or not doing that is because of your child's anxiety. So like you're trying to avoid their anxious emotions in some way. And then you pick one of those things at a time and you make a plan how you're going to change it. You go through all the what if scenarios, and all of this is just with the parent, not the kid.
the child
You're
hasn't
all
been brought into this at all.
No, and you go through all the what if scenarios. Okay, well, if I set a boundary around bedtime, what if they follow me? Okay, let's make a plan around that. If what if they cry and they don't sleep? We make all these plans. And then we do something which also is very unique to space, which is the announcement. And the announcement is explaining to the child what it is that you've been doing that hasn't been helping them that you're now going to do differently. So it's something like, first we always are very positive. It's like, we love you so much and we're so proud of you. And then we say, we
Right.
notice at bedtime you get very worried what being alone in your room. We now know that when we stay in your room until you fall asleep, it doesn't help you be less worried when you're alone in your room.
Okay.
So from now on, we are going to do X, and we come up with whatever plan that looks like. Ellie Leibowitz has a lot of free YouTube videos about these things, and he has a way that he explains. I make the plans based on the parents. So I'll say, well,
Got it.
what's your value? What's your cultural norms in your home about bedtime? And it doesn't have to look one way, but if you want to change something, you have to change it. It can't be up to
Got
the
it.
kid.
Oh, I love that. I think that's so
Yeah.
powerful to because I think there's so many things that it's I mean, think about screens. I just don't know what to do.
Yes.
My kid loves being on their screens. You're not going to convince them just, or they're not just going to come up with the thought of themselves of, like, I'm spending too
No.
much time on my screens. I'm
Yeah.
playing too much Minecraft. I'm on YouTube Shorts too much. I should just get off and go play outside. We as the parents have to take the leadership role and
Yes.
say, hey, I, as the parent, can see that this is not good for you. And because I'm your parent, I'm going to make decisions that you may not like in the short term, but will be good for
Right.
you in the long term. And that's not being authoritarian. It's saying, here's
No.
the boundaries and here's the responsibilities and privileges within those boundaries. And here's what's outside of those.
Yeah. And what I really like about it is, and so space is all about anxiety. I tell parents all the time, we can use these things for parenting. That's not directly from the Yale Child Study Center. This is like how we've used it in practice. Is screens are a great example. It's not something we typically do with, because we can't always know what is more of a addiction versus an anxiety,
Sure.
but with the screens. But doing something like this, taking ownership of it as a parent versus trying to wait for our kids to feel like, you're gonna be waiting forever. I can't stop touching my phone. I like, how are we waiting for the kids? And then parents will often say, is this too mean? Am I being too
Mm,
hard? And I say, I think the meanest thing you can do is expect your kid to change before you.
right.
Someone said, I saw a quote on Instagram recently, which I think is so funny because it's from the Super Nanny. Remember the Super Nanny show? Yeah. So she wrote this great like thing, and I was like, this is just said so well, which is, stop expecting the least developed brain in the family to make the change. Stop
Very well
expecting
said.
that to happen. And I feel like that aligns with space. It's like, why are we waiting for them? And I also say to people, you can't collaborate with an anxious brain, because then you're collaborating with their anxiety, not the kid. So we want to be like thinking from the big picture, not trying to see, how do you feel before bed? What do you want? What do you need? Da da da. Because they're not going to answer you. The anxiety is going to answer you.
So it sounds like in the big picture at bedtime, you're going to say, this is how bedtime is going to go. And then you're
Yeah.
going to lay it out for them. And then how does a parent respond to the obvious,
Yeah.
anxiety brain speaking back to them in their child? What does that look like? How do you navigate that? Because
Yeah.
I could see a lot of parents being like, well, that sounds hard, and they'll probably push back or it'll cause more issues. How do you give parents the courage to stand up to that anxiety and help them feel like they're loving their child and, like you said, not just being mean?
Yeah. Well, first thing I do when someone asks me questions is, instead of answering and trying to solve, I always say, remember, you don't have to do this. So
Mhm.
when a parent, like when people talk about bedtime, I always say, if bedtime is working for you and you're laying with your kids until they go to sleep and bedtime is working for you, it is no one's job to tell you that you can't do that. Or like,
Sure.
your kid comes to your room in the middle of the night and like that helps everybody in the house stay asleep. Okay, it's okay. So the first thing I do is try to flip it back on them and really model that this is your choice, like your
Got it.
choice to disrupt the pattern. And the reason
Hmm.
is because if you're going to make change, it has to come from you, and you have to feel empowered to do it. So like, I'm not going to convince you that it's worth it. Like I'm like, I care deeply about my clients, but I also am like, I don't have skin in the game. I don't know, that's a weird thing to say. I guess I
Well, they have
do,
agency.
but
They have to decide for
yeah, I
themselves.
don't
This is,
know. And
I'm going to
every
give you the tools, but
family,
you decide if you're going to build the
yeah,
shed or just
yeah,
leave the
exactly.
tools in the garage and leave all the 2x4s
Yeah.
on the ground. Yeah.
And every family is different, and I respect that. And you also, every family is going through different stages. You could have a time where it's not appropriate or whatever. That, all that to say, is usually a conversation like that helps parents get on board with holding the boundary, because they are saying, oh, you're right. I came to you for help. Something isn't working. I want to make a change. And so then they kind of like will be a little bit more empowered to do that. And then what Space talks about in terms of responding to distress. So we do something called stress testing, where we stress test all of our plans. And we actually say, okay, when your kid does this, you're going to do this. So one of the things is we do it. I always say a lot of the stuff is repackaged in different ways, but basically we talk about delaying response. So just because your kid is upset that you're leaving the room doesn't mean you need to be responding. So one of them
Hmm.
is delaying. One of them is just fully disengaging with the anxiety and saying, I am not responding to that anymore, but maybe you're responding to other things that you're doing, but not the ruminating thoughts or the questions or the negotiations or the debate or whatever. And then one of them is also distancing, which is really giving your kids space to feel their feelings, but you're like, me being here is only keeping this conversation going. So I'm actually going to exit. Also, the plan you make can be a plan that fits your family. So if you're okay sitting in the room, but you don't want to lay, you can sit. If you want to do something where you leave, but come back after 5 minutes, you can do that. Space, Ellie Leibowitz on YouTube, this video, he talks about basically stretching out the time that your kid is alone in the room, but staying there till they fall asleep, but every night
Yeah,
stretching. So leave for 5 minutes, come back, and then sit in a chair until they fall asleep. So you're basically like building the muscle around them being alone.
totally.
So basically, you come up with a plan that fits you, and then you come up with a lot of crafty ways of saying, you're going to be quiet and you're going to do the thing that you said you were going to do. And your kid's going to get upset and you're going to walk them back and you're going to
Hmm.
follow the thing. But the biggest thing is, if what they are doing, like negotiating, debating, gets what they want, you're reinforcing that versus
Totally.
the opposite. So it's like
Well,
you talk it all through.
Well, that is actually really fun that you brought that example came out, because that is how I approach it when parents come to me and are struggling with their kids' sleep in particular, of like, we can't get out of bed or we're stuck laying with them, and then all of those sorts of things is something very similar to that. And to your point, exactly, if they say, well, I don't think we can do that, I'm like, well, you can keep doing what you're doing, but you came to me because you felt like
Right.
something wasn't right. So I love getting to hear that. Let's shift gears and talk a little about other places where parents are trying to, with good intention, accommodate anxiety to help their child, but making things harder. Are there any
Mhm.
kind of classic examples that you see on a regular basis that
100%.
we can shift the approach to and see a big change?
Yes, there's very classic examples. There is, I basically, that's why I created a group format and
Mhm.
a self-paced course online that I on my website, because I was saying the same thing over and over again. And I was like, I love working with individuals, but I was like, there are so many ways to get this information. I mean, there's the book by
Right.
Ellie Leibowitz, but also I was like, do you want a video? Do you want a group? What do you want? Because you're all saying the same thing. So, and I should say, I have 3 kids. We're all saying the same thing. I'm part of that collective
Yeah,
we. The most common ones I see are separation, but that plays out over the course of the lifespan, basically.
sure.
So there's the classic drop off, but then there's also whether or not your kid will try new activities, stay at developmentally, stay at birthdays, parties by themselves, and then it escalates into sleepovers,
Right.
tournament sports. It just goes on, but all of it goes back to separation. Also, a really classic one that permeates a lot is reassurance seeking. So
Mm.
parents will be answering constant questions for kids, like details of the day, what time you're coming home, and then that really translates into when you have a kid who has a phone. I work with a lot of
Mhm.
parents who are getting texts constantly throughout the day from their kid, and
Mm.
so I work with them on, you can't make your kid if you give your kid access to a phone as a way to text you, they're going to
Right.
message you. And
Right.
so you have to come up with the boundaries of what you're going to do. So I help parents set boundaries around providing reassurance, either by phone or verbally.
Got it.
And so reassurance seeking, separation, a lot of space works really well for phobias. So
Mm.
parents will avoid emetophobia is a great one. So the fear of throwing up. So what
Mhm.
will happen with emetophobia is obviously you can do exposure response therapy prevention, exposure response prevention for emetophobia, the fear of throwing up. But also parents are probably sucked into reassurance, getting constant wondering about the actual illness piece, are like calling doctors,
Right.
googling,
Right. Right.
avoiding things that bring up the fear of throwing up, avoiding certain length car rides, avoiding making kids sit in different places in their cars so that they can accommodate it, not having kids go in cars with other people because it brings on their emetophobia. So like all
Right.
of that is versions of accommodation. So emetophobia is a huge one. And usually when a parent comes to me for that, we don't have a diagnosis of emetophobia. We just have my kid is really afraid of throwing up. And so I've done all these things and now it's just getting worse.
Yeah.
So separation, emetophobia, a lot of phobias. Phobias is a big one. Oh, also parents come to me whose kids are doing OCD rituals, but the parents have
Mm.
started participating in the rituals.
Got it.
So we would be working with the parent on decreasing their participation in the rituals. So those are like some of the most common ones that I see.
What's something that parents do wrong? I'm just thinking of back to school right now. What's something that parents inadvertently do that makes things harder when it comes to school avoidance, drop off, anxiety, those sorts of things?
So I just did a post about this and it really resonated with people, which so I'm like, this is what I'm gonna say because I think I hit something here, which is that what people are doing wrong is they're trying to solve the anxiety, thinking that's the freedom. The freedom is
Mm.
how do we prepare? So my post I did was about preparing your kid for school. And but what people do is they prepare their kid with the concept that they're going to alleviate the anxiety enough where school will be tolerable.
Got it.
What we are teaching people and what space is teaching people, and I didn't even talk about this, but one of the language formula we use in space is called supportive language. And what it is it's a validation plus confidence. And so that is how I want you to think about anxiety work with your kids. I want you to think about it like I am going to believe their experience, but believe in them while they're having that experience. And so when you're preparing your kid for back to school, you're not preparing them with the hopes that they're not anxious. You're
Right.
preparing them with the fact that they're going to be anxious and capable at the same time. And that is what we're doing all the time with our kids. We're saying, yes, you hate the fear of throwing up. You are afraid you're going to throw up in your classroom. Last year, Susie threw up next to you. Now you never want to go to school again. I totally get it. And I believe you can be in that classroom while you're afraid of throwing up. You're going to be in the classroom while you're nauseous. You're going to be in the classroom while these fears are happening. And so obviously I'm being really aggressive right now. I wouldn't just come out that hot, out of the gate that hot. But the idea is where parents go wrong. And I actually want to say where professionals go wrong, where school
Right.
staff goes wrong. I think people are constantly trying to prepare our kids enough that they feel better before they go do the thing. And
Mm.
I am always saying, you're going to do the thing while you're only 20% okay, while you're
Right.
30% okay. That is really where I think we go wrong. We set the stage as if it's possible to cure the anxiety before the school, but I don't know about you, but I've been living my life through all these feelings the whole time. Nothing's been solved. Um, and yeah, so that's a big way that I think that that's where we go wrong. Our message is, I'm going to help you with this, and then you'll be capable. But that's
So
not what we want to say.
in the big picture, it sounds like you're going to validate and then also say, yeah, I think you can still do it. Like, I can understand why you're nervous about giving a speech in front of the class. And I know that you can do it.
Yeah.
And then
And
are
I
you
know
giving them evidence of past times where they've been successful, or what does it look like when you're building the case for why they should proceed forward?
I want to critique a little what you just said. I hope that's okay.
Of
Which is
course.
that we don't even say, I know you can do it. It's literally, I know you're scared to get up in front of people, and I know you can get up in front of people while you're scared. And I know that sounds
Okay.
different.
Yeah.
And also it's really important to the difference between Like you don't want the validation to fall into the reassurance or the confidence or something to fall into you can do it because I don't know if they can do it. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know. I don't know
Right.
if it'll be okay. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know they can have the feeling and the thing
Right.
can happen. I
Right.
know that.
Okay.
So basically it's this really like bring it to this is life's going to happen. Friday's going to
Mhm.
come. The thing is going to happen. But when you're doing that, remind me what you just said, the second part of your question, because I got distracted.
I had said something along the lines of validate and that you can move forward, but is there a
Oh,
specific like evidence that you need to provide
yeah.
to say why I still believe that you can do
Yeah.
it or no?
So no, this is an interesting part of space that I really like because I do come from a CBT model and I have done the whole Socratic method of saying, okay, well, what's the worst case if that happens, or what's the fear underneath, or like what you're saying is bringing it, like Lynn Lyons does a great job of bridging it back to successes, which we love. In this moment while you're doing this work specifically, all of that sort of becomes reassurance. And
Right.
anxiety doesn't care that you've done it before. Like any kid you know that cries every day at drop off for their whole life doesn't care that they went to school yesterday or that they went to
Got
camp
it.
yesterday. Like
Yeah.
their brain will say, their anxiety will be whispering in their ear, today is different. They just don't
Mm,
realize today is different. And
got
so
it.
we actually don't I don't teach parents to do that. What we will do, which is unique and nuanced, that and is not specifically in the space model, is I will scaffold with parents any sort of extra like outside the anxiety realm need. So if you have a kid, I used ADHD earlier. If you have a kid who has ADHD and they do need executive functioning accommodations, we're not being like, well, sorry, we believe in you. We're still
Right.
scaffolding that. If you have a kid who
Right.
has sensory needs, I'm going to make sure they're wearing an outfit that's comfortable for them. I'm going to make sure they have the classroom teacher they need if that's something we've been discussing. We're going to talk about their accommodations that aren't anxiety accommodations because
Sure.
that's how we separate. So the validation plus the confidence, the way we're talking is like that's what we do. And then the extra parts are more like, and I believe you are capable of doing this while you're scared. Is there something you can have in your pocket while you feel scared?
Mm.
Is there a person you can look at in the room that helps you feel a little better while you're scared? It's more about, is there a tool we can use, but not so that you're all better or something like that. You
Right,
know what I
right. You're
mean?
going to keep going despite that feeling. And I think that's something where parents often get stuck is we have to figure out how to eliminate the anxiety and we have to figure out how to make sure that they aren't experiencing that discomfort. When it sounds
Yes.
like what you're saying is we should help our child to live through that discomfort and to continue forward knowing that they are going to experience that discomfort. And I
Mhm.
mean, I think that tracks with life. Life isn't fair, like Scar said on The Lion King. Like
Yeah.
bad stuff happens to people and we keep going. And so if we're going to tell our child, I do think that you can keep going despite your worries, then that is
Yeah.
very much how they're going to experience the rest of life too, is like we keep going even though these bad things happened that maybe were not in our control or that we made a mistake or something along those lines.
And a lot of the pushback I get online is about, okay, then your kid's just going to shut down, or they're going to stop telling you something, or they're going to start masking, or something like
Right.
that. And I have a lot of different responses to those things. With the term masking, I get
Mhm.
frustrated because I feel like, why did we make that such a horrible word? We all mask all the time. And I'm not saying the true version of masking is has been lost, and we're like overgeneralizing these terms as if every time someone's anxious at school and they pretend they're not, they're masking. It's like
Right.
that's not what that is. And so I try to say to people, this is something that kids have to do, that we all have to do. And if we just remove all of these things, their world is just going to get so small. And if that's what you want, okay, fine. That's fine. I don't mind when people do it. It's when they're like, I want my kid to be able to do XYZ. I'm like, okay, then they have to do the XYZ. They
Right.
can't, they're
Like
not
if
going
you
to
want
stay
them
at
to
home
be
and
on the
think
hockey
about it.
team, they have to be comfortable going to hockey practice and going to the
Exactly.
hockey game. If this is important to you, then we have to figure out how to get them to do that despite and through their
Yeah,
worries.
exactly. Exactly. And so there is pushback for sure of what you're going to make my kid shut down, all that. And I'm like, that it is a fear. And we always talk about what are the barriers, and
Mhm.
that is one of them for sure. And I talk to parents. That's why we have so much validating. That's why we have so much positivity, and that's why we add in scaffolding so that the kid
Right.
doesn't feel like you're throwing them in without anything. You don't throw a kid who can't swim into the water and just say, "Oh, well, sorry." You give them what they need and you teach them. And so if we're having to teach a skill, then we teach that skill. We're not like, go read even though you can't read. That we teach the skill. So if there's a skill of getting up in front of people, we can teach the skill and we can believe that they're capable of doing it.
Now, are there any really common things that you have been seeing in the past couple of years that were not common before when it comes to anxiety accommodations, a more permissive approach to parenting that have ballooned in the past few years?
I think one of them is what I was saying about the reassurance. So I think
Mhm.
because more kids, we are now coming up on a generation that was truly, including my children, I'm putting myself in this, truly raised with technology, with
Mhm.
immediate, like immediate fun, immediate answers, immediate, like all of that. There, everything is gamified in the
Right.
classroom, everything. And so I think that's where some of those like constant, incessant questions have gotten worse. I need to know what time something is happening. I need to know exactly what's going on. I need to, because so much of their information is just so immediate. And so I think
Totally.
that's gotten a lot worse. And because we don't have a lot built in currently where kids have to wait,
Right.
just wait for something. Like I, if I'm late, my kids are way more reactive than I feel. I don't know, I feel like we just didn't know when people were coming to pick us up. I just didn't know. There was no like tracker, there was no. So I think this immediacy, this reassurance seeking, this the whole like getting texts, why are kids texting from the bathroom being asked to pick up? Why is that should
Right.
not be a thing. The whole kids using technology at sleepovers, like
Hmm.
forget about the actual risk of all that. If you think about it just in terms of like the anxiety and the parent relationship, like I had a situation where I like no longer does the parent have to go through the other adult. It's like there's this weird circumventing that's happening. But so then the kid
Right.
is, I think all of that is blowing up anxiety. Like all of that is like,
Mm.
they can reach out to their parent, they can tell them exactly what they feel at every moment, they can complain about it, they can do all that, and they no longer have to have these like adult interactions or waiting or like problem solving things. And I think I feel like that's become a really big problem. We have to acknowledge, I should have started with this honestly, the school avoidance is like,
Mm.
when did it become an option to not go to school? What, like,
Right.
I'm not saying parents are giving an option. I'm not even saying that. Literally, when did this happen that there is an epidemic of kids just not going to school?
Right.
It just, I don't, and I don't have a lot to say except that I feel like that has gotten really blown up over I don't know where that started. I don't know if it's the abilities of schools to handle certain things. I don't know what's going on, but that idea that we have to not push our kids into settings that
Mhm.
are uncomfortable, or I don't know what word, but like the severity at which parents respond to that type of comment is like, well, school is dangerous for the nervous system, or school is constantly asking my kid to do all these things that are out of their abilities, or whatever it is. It just, it really that has blown up so much. I don't know how we got here. Do you know how we got here?
Well, I think,
What do
I
you
mean,
think?
my guess is that COVID made school feel much more optional for a lot of
Mm.
families, or they realized that no one was really keeping track of their kid all that well. And there weren't really any repercussions for a couple of years of not having your kid in school. And I think that, and then just like this overarching swing towards permissive parenting at the moment of like,
Mhm.
oh, you seem uncomfortable with going to school today. Let's just stay home when there
Yeah.
isn't really any sort of valid reason of like you're sick or you just threw up or you have strep throat or something
Yeah.
along those lines
Right.
that you're not feeling comfortable and we can't understand it. Now, certainly if they're being bullied or if they're having some sort of issue, obviously we're going to address those or encourage parents to get those addressed. But if
Yeah.
it's simply a measure of I don't feel comfortable, I don't want to, and the parent is just busy, overwhelmed, overstimulated themselves, then the path of least resistance is going to get followed, which is, okay, I'll just call you in. we'll just stay home
Right.
today. And so I think that kind
Right.
of perpetuates itself and just keeps the little fire going of, and if I don't really feel like it, then I probably can get out of going to school today.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to come knocking on the door if my kid misses a few days or weeks of school anymore.
And it's not one party's. I think you're right to talk about COVID. It's not one party. It's everything has gotten out of control in this regard.
Yeah.
And so if you ask what's ballooned, like to me, I think the bar, it's weird to me how anxiety has, I mean, I love specializing in anxiety. I am not lacking for people who need help in this. So I guess we shouldn't complain, but for something that you just live with, like anxiety is not meant to keep you from school. It's not
Right.
meant to keep you from doing
Right.
things or to keep you home. It's not why it's part of your nervous system. And the whole nervous system conversation is like a different conversation, but the idea that we have gotten to this place where we have to avoid so much to keep our kids. And if you write on social media that like your kids should do these things or talking about masking and how everyone could stand to like, I don't want to say pretend, but adapt, people will be like, but that actually hurts. It physically hurts when you're uncomfortable at school. And I'm like, there are probably a very small subset of humans that is true for. A very, very, very small. I don't want to disregard true diagnoses that present that way. But how generalized this all has gotten is just unbelievable to me.
I think that I see one thing that comes out a lot nowadays is if kids don't like the thing that you've asked them to do, then they are demand avoidant.
Yes.
And then we should not give them demands because they can't handle demands. And I mean, I don't want to get too into the weeds or
I know,
call
I know,
call
I know.
specific people out on this sort of thing, but it becomes this, if my child doesn't like being told to empty the dishwasher or go to school or to clean their room or that they have to do this, that, or the other thing, if we hold any boundaries and they push back, then they're demand avoidant and we need to withdraw demands. Then it perpetuates this cycle of I don't have control over my child and there's no one is at the wheels.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of these parents, what they would say is that it's way more than just them just not wanting to do something. And I think for a subset of kids, it is a true because PDA was originally talked about for as a subset of as a piece of autism. But again, we have all these things that have now just been overgeneralized. Like you could have a sensory need with or a sensory preference or discomfort around something sensory related without having a processing disorder or without
Right.
having something. We have just gone too far with all of it. And there's actually a New York Times article that was just written about how we've just been talking so much about mental health that we've made it all worse. So that's a whole
Hmm.
other thing too. But I feel like the way things have been generalized has been really hard. I know we went somewhere weird right now, but I think the reason was because I think when you asked about the ballooning of things,
Yeah.
what I think has been ballooned is how much we are avoiding things because of the anxiety,
Right.
because of the fear for our kids' experiences. And that in general has been ballooned. Not answering your kid texts right away. That shouldn't be that weird. Not always going to pick them up from school and not putting them in situations. I'm having this whole thing with someone. Oh, I did a reel about Big Little Feelings, who
Mm.
they're like a huge parenting account. And I don't have any hate on them or anything, but they were talking about if you drop your kid off at camp and they cry in the mornings.
Right.
And again, like the idea that we have, like, sure, that camp might not be a good fit. We might actually want to help that kid go to a different camp. That could be true. And typically camp and school are also childcare because you're working. And
Right.
when was it like, oh, we now are so scared for our children, so scared for our children to be somewhere that they can't go there and I have to now fix that for them. Do you know what I mean? It's like that's such an interesting place we've brought ourselves to.
Well, I think there's this fear of discomfort. And I think that
Yeah.
that is what has really fueled the permissive parenting movement that
Yeah.
we're currently like swung to that side of I as the parent must avoid causing my child discomfort. And if my child is experiencing discomfort, then it is my problem to solve, even if it means I have to break all these boundaries and break all these rules and disregard our family values or culture or those sorts of things, is that my child's discomfort is something that I can't tolerate. I think
Mhm.
on the flip side of that, authoritarian is parents are, I must avoid my discomfort. And my discomfort comes when my child snaps back at something that I say or is defiant or doesn't do exactly what I say on the first request, then I'm uncomfortable because it threatens my authority. And so I, as the authoritarian parent, must avoid that at all costs. And I think that
Yeah.
it's just the parenting sides are about avoiding someone's discomfort,
Yeah.
and that we just can't handle discomfort. And I think there's a lot of fuel of that for online, just the way that people make it seem like everything must be pathologized and that our children are very delicate.
Yeah. I also think that's important to say, like, I think I said this a couple of times, is that it didn't come from the parents only. I also think systemically, we have also become afraid of a parent being upset that you don't call. So then the school calls too much, or you're afraid of that other kid who your kid might be bothering. So that
Right.
kid needs you to call. Or I think it's a whole systemic weird, because I think parents in a lot of ways came by it honestly. It's like, we all were doing the best we can and trying to figure out how to be in these systems. And because a lot of times a parent will
Mhm.
be like, I don't want to go pick up, but if the nurse calls me, am I allowed to say no? And so that's when we
Right.
also step in and try to educate school staff and cram staff or other people about how do you actually navigate when you have an anxious kid, not just
Right.
jumping to calling. So it's a whole systemic issue. It's not just the parents at all.
Oh, for sure. Yep. I think we've just swung the other way of rub some
Yeah.
dirt on it to, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how could you have hurt you? Let's call your mom, across all the different things. Well, I know this has been a winding road
I
conversation.
know.
It's been really helpful to me to hear about space, first and foremost. And I would encourage everyone to check out your Instagram account. You have your own podcast
Yep.
called Do Less Parenting, and so many other ways to connect with you, because I think that this is really valuable. And I love people that are putting the impetus on the parents to help their child, whether it's anxiety or ADHD or whatever the child is facing. There's a lot that we as parents can do. So I appreciate you sharing, and then getting into really the nuance and the weeds of it all. And it's a very specific approach rather than just accommodate everything. And let's just talk about how we're feeling about our feelings and all of those sorts of things. So thank you.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I like to say to people, my biggest flex is that every single thing I teach people, I also do myself as a parent because I also have to do that. So I get it,
Totally.
and it's really effective. So I love being able to talk about it.
Well, I'll send everyone in the show notes to your website to learn more about your program, to learn more about space, and to follow you to learn even more. All right, so in our last segment today, we have a question from a mom, and I really enjoy getting to answer questions. If you have a question, click the link below, drop your question in the comment section, or you can leave me an audio message, even better, so that I can listen to it, come up with a response, and we can discuss it on an upcoming episode.
Hi, so my 3.5-year-old it seems like he's very impulsive. He really has behavioral management issues, super, super high energy, really difficult to transition, has really intense tantrums when he doesn't get what he wants. Sometimes he can get aggressive. When he's happy, but when he's mad, he's really, really mad. Has a hard time in school with focusing and, just doing the right thing. Usually copies all the kids that are doing, what they shouldn't be doing. I don't want to do a full workup of blood work for him to see if maybe he's missing any nutrients or vitamins. Maybe his diet needs to be changed. We really try to avoid added sugars or food coloring, but yeah, maybe you can give me some tips.
All right, so this is a great question from a mom that's trying to get a handle on her 3.5-year-old. One of the things that parents often ask about is like, are there vitamin and mineral deficiencies that could be contributing to this? That would not be what I would lead with in this circumstance. If they came in for an evaluation, we may consider doing that depending on the specifics of how picky of an eater they are, what their sleep is like, especially if they are a restless sleeper. Sometimes that will lead me to, okay, we should check their iron. We should check some other vitamins and minerals and things along those lines to make sure that that isn't a stone that we're leaving unturned that's making it harder to get a handle on things overall. But when I hear this story about an impulsive child that is really high energy, that has difficulty with transitions, all of these things are in the spectrum of normal for a 3-year-old, but it sounds like from what this mom had said that it is much more challenging, and that at school he's having a hard time. When he's happy, he's happy. When he's really mad, he's really mad. The 3 things that I think of at this age, one is just like the more challenging child with a more intense temperament. And those are things where we as parents can put in place more authoritative parenting practices and have that be beneficial. Now, I don't actually think that's what's going on with this child, but I'm just saying that if that were the case, kids that are 3 and have difficulty with transitions need us to help steer the ship. And what that looks like is putting in boundaries and expectations rather than letting them rule the roost. I often see and hear from families where they don't feel like they have a handle on things. Their child screams until they get the iPad. So they give them the iPad, of course, because they have to get other things done. They need a moment's rest themselves. And it causes a lot more stress and frustration for the entire family. And the child just it feels like the child is dependent on it. It feels like that's the only thing they can do to get them to calm down. Now, oftentimes what happens is we don't have those good boundaries in place because our child is making things so challenging. And so what I always tell parents is like, we're not going to, completely turn this ship around overnight. But if we take the little wheel, the mast, or is it the mast? Whatever the thing is on the ship, like I'm thinking of an old pirate ship that you turn. You guys are all just shouting out the name of it, like the wheel, whatever it might be. We're going to turn the wheel a couple of degrees at a time until we're on the right course. And so what that would look like to me is picking one specific thing. Maybe it's screens, maybe it's bedtime, or maybe it's watching screens at mealtime. Maybe it's getting our shoes on our own. We're going to pick one very specific place where it is a challenge and focus our energy on there, realizing that we can't change everything at once, but we can incrementally make those tiny little adjustments by putting boundaries and expectations in place. Now, my guess from what you've described here is that this is a child that has some sensory challenges. We see a lot of kids, especially the 3-year-olds, especially post-COVID, where they have missed out on kind of some of those sensory experiences and sensory regulation strategies that it's just much more of an issue than it was before COVID. I see it quite frequently. And I think that, parenting has changed, kids' exposures have changed, what we expect of them has changed, demands have changed, a lot of different things come into play. But I do see this with a lot of sensory seeking kids. I will actually refer you back to an earlier episode of Dear Parents where I talked with Dr. Kristen Feil specifically about sensory processing. But when I hear that we have difficulty with transitions, that we have really high energy and are hard to get a handle on or hard to put some control around, that makes me think of sensory issues. The way that will often manifest with kids is they're running around and screaming. They're jumping on things. They're throwing themselves into the couch or into the chair. They're giving oversized hugs, or they're really shutting down when things get loud, when things get noisy, when there's big movements. That tells me that our sensory system is out of whack. And imagine that you're trying to do all the things that you do as an adult, but there's this sound that just won't stop, or there's a smell that's really bothering you, or you feel like you really need to wiggle and stand up and you can't do that, or you're feeling off balance, how hard it is to function and do all the things that you as an adult need to do. Kids are the same. Kids with sensory challenges react in big ways to try and get a better handle on the world and get things to a place of regulation. But that often comes out sideways as aggression, as being mad, as throwing things, as hitting, as tantruming, as difficulty transitioning. So my guess is that is actually what's going on. Now, some children that have a difficulty with behaviors and super high energy, like this mom had said, they will go on to have ADHD. I don't diagnose ADHD in 3.5-year-olds because the vast majority of the time when parents come to me and they say, I think my 3.5-year-old has ADHD, they have sensory processing challenges. Now, they might go on to have ADHD in the future, but we need to have them see a occupational therapist to work through a lot of those sensory processing challenges now, rather than treat them as if they have ADHD or start them on medications or anything like that. I would not do that for a 3-year-old. When it comes to the vitamins and minerals, since this mom asked, there aren't a lot that I check on a regular basis for behavioral issues in this age group. But I would, if I was getting blood in or had a good reason for that, I would certainly check a iron level and a CBC, which helps us to look for anemia and iron deficiency. Even children that are getting iron in their diet and they're not anemic can have lower iron levels. And I've talked about that on other episodes. And there was just a recent clinical guideline put out by the AAP about iron deficiency without anemia, that can cause behavioral challenges. It can cause restless sleep. It can cause a lot of different issues. And so checking the ferritin would be helpful in my book. I usually will also check a vitamin D to make sure their vitamin D level is okay, because that can have some effects on their overall behavior and mood. And then I also check a copper and a zinc. These are two that can have a role, especially as we get older in the ADHD realm. If our copper and our zinc, which are normal facets of our diet and the things that we eat, are really out of whack, sometimes we will see more hyperactivity. That's more of a niche, nuanced sort of thing. It's not where I would put all my money at this point. In fact, if this 3-year-old probably isn't going to like lab work, I would probably at this point not be super excited about getting lab work on them, and have them see an OT and say, is this the right tree to bark up? Is this more of a sensory processing issue where we can, get some vestibular input? We can teach them some proprioception strategies that they can put into place at home and see how things change when they're able to move their body, when they're able to get a better sense of their world and more regulation when it comes to their senses. That would really be my approach for seeing a child like this. I would also, and lastly, be talking a lot about sleep. I would be investigating, are they a restless sleeper? Do they snore? Do they mouth breathe? Are they all over the bed at night? Is it really difficult to get them calmed down? Are they wired but tired? Are they not getting good rest? Because all of those things are going to amplify what we are seeing here. And there's different things that we can do for each of those. So that would be my big picture, long-winded approach for this 3.5-year-old that we see these kids all the time. They're often getting kicked out of daycare because they're aggressive or they're having really a lot of difficulty with transitions. We get them set up with an OT. We make sure that their sleep and their diet and those things support them, and they grow into their busy body and busy brain in a lot of different ways. Hopefully this episode was helpful for you. Thank you to Nova Ferrum for sponsoring this episode. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more about Nova Ferrum and their very tasty, very palatable drops and chewables and pills for iron for adults as well. If you have questions, if you have ideas or thoughts about this show that you would like to share, if you have something that you would like to know more about, drop a comment on the Substack for this episode, and I will see you on the next episode. In the meantime, keep up the good work.